Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and drift back in time. Not to the quiet comfort of your own bed in, say, a cozy bungalow in Asheville, North Carolina, but to the dusty, sun-baked plains of ancient Greece. Forget the serene images of philosophers debating in marble courtyards. Tonight, we're stepping onto the battlefield, right into the heart of a fearsome war machine. We're going to explore what fighting in a Greek phalanx was actually like. You might think you understand discipline or what it means to be part of a team. But trust me, after tonight, you'll have a whole new appreciation for personal space and the simple act of walking freely. You'd probably last about 5 minutes before the sheer claustrophobia and terror got to you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself now, a young Greek citizen soldier, a hoplite, not waking up to the gentle hum of your alarm clock in a quiet suburban home in Des Moines, Iowa, but rising before dawn in a makeshift camp on the plains of Marathon. Or perhaps assembling with your fellow citizens near the fields outside of Athens, or to give it an American context, picture yourself as a young militiaman in the nascent days of the American Revolution, preparing for battle in a close-knit company from your hometown, or a nervous infantryman during the Civil War, forming up with your brothers in arms on a vast open field like Gettysburg. As the sun begins to peek over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, you feel the familiar chill of pre-battle dread. But it's not just the enemy you're thinking about, it's the men beside you, behind you, in front of you. Because your life, and theirs, depends entirely on the intricate, unyielding structure that is the phalanx. This is the pervasive, often terrifying, reality of the unyielding wall formation and discipline, where individual bravery meant nothing without absolute cohesion. And the very act of fighting transformed into a synchronized, relentless push, where every man was a brick in a living, breathing, utterly inflexible wall of bronze and courage. The phalanx wasn't just a group of soldiers, it was a military formation, a tactical marvel that defined Greek warfare for centuries. It was essentially a dense, rectangular mass of infantry, typically 8 ranks deep, sometimes more. Each man, a hoplite, stood shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, forming a continuous wall of bronze and wood. Your large, circular shield, the hoplon from which the hoplite gets his name, was perhaps your most crucial piece of equipment. It was nearly a meter in diameter, made of wood, often faced with bronze, and incredibly heavy. But here's the kicker: the hoplon was designed to protect not just you, but also the man to your left. This meant that the right side of every hoplite was inherently exposed, forcing you to rely entirely on the shield of your comrade beside you. This fundamental design flaw, or rather intentional feature, meant that courage wasn't just about facing the enemy. It was about trusting the man next to you with your life. Literally, if he faltered, if he broke rank, your exposed right side was vulnerable, and the entire line could be compromised. Imagine the immense pressure of that trust. You're not just fighting for your city-state, you're fighting to protect the man whose shield is covering your flank, and you know he's doing the same for you. There was no room for individual heroism, no space for flashy maneuvers. Your role was singular: hold your ground, push forward and maintain the line. Discipline was paramount. If one man panicked and broke formation, a gap would appear, and the enemy, like a torrent through a broken dam, could pour through, unraveling the entire phalanx. This absolute reliance on collective action, on every single individual performing their precise, non-negotiable duty, made the phalanx both incredibly powerful and incredibly fragile. It's a bit like a human wave in a football stadium, where one person breaking the flow can disrupt the entire movement. But here, the stakes are life and death, far more intense than any team sport you might play in a park in Denver, Colorado. A common historical truth is that the Greek phalanx was a military formation characterized by its dense ranks of heavily armed hoplites, whose effectiveness relied entirely on the rigid discipline, cohesion, and mutual trust among its members, rather than individual combat prowess. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of fighting in such a tightly packed formation, particularly regarding the balance between individual fear and the collective courage derived from peer pressure and shared vulnerability. The training for this kind of warfare began young. As a citizen soldier, you weren't a professional warrior in the modern sense. You were a farmer, a craftsman, a merchant who picked up his arms when called upon. But the drills were constant. You'd learn to march in unison, to move as one, to respond to commands without hesitation. You'd practice forming the shield wall, the synaspismos, pushing forward with your dory, a long spear extended, your body braced against the shield of your neighbor. This wasn't just physical training, it was psychological conditioning, designed to strip away individual will and replace it with a collective identity, a single, unyielding entity. It's a bit like the rigorous basic training for a modern Marine Corps recruit, where individuality is deliberately broken down to build a cohesive unit, but with the added existential pressure that your unit might be your entire civilian community. Not just a temporary military assignment. The sheer noise of a phalanx preparing for battle, then engaging, would have been deafening. The rhythmic tramp of thousands of armored feet, the metallic clang of shields bumping, the heavy breathing of men under immense loads, then the roar of the commanders, the war cries, and finally, the horrific crash as two phalanxes collided, a sound that would curdle your blood. Imagine standing in the front rank, holding your breath, your heart pounding like a drum, knowing that any second, the world would explode into a maelstrom of metal, wood, and flesh. The physical impact of the collision was often described as a push, the othismos. It wasn't about elegant swordplay, it was a brutal, sustained shove. A collective effort to overwhelm the enemy line through sheer mass and pressure. This kind of combat was physically exhausting and psychologically draining. Far more akin to a rugby scrum with deadly weapons than any stylized duel you might see in a movie. This brutal push meant that the men in the front ranks were under unimaginable stress. Your spear, about 7 to 9 feet long, was your primary offensive weapon. You'd thrust it forward, aiming for any exposed flesh, faces, necks, bellies. But once the lines truly met, and the spears inevitably broke or became entangled, it devolved into a chaotic, desperate close-quarters struggle with your sword. A shorter, stabbing weapon. You'd be pressed so tightly against your comrades, and against the enemy, that individual movement was almost impossible. It's like being trapped in a mosh pit where everyone is armed, and survival depends on staying upright and pushing relentlessly. A claustrophobic nightmare far removed from the open spaces of a typical American battlefield. The men in the rear ranks had a different, but no less vital role. They would push against the backs of the men in front of them, adding their weight and momentum to the collective shove. They were the engine of the phalanx, the relentless force that kept the wall moving forward. This meant that even if you weren't actively thrusting a spear, you were still engaged in a continuous, grueling physical effort, your body straining, your muscles burning, pushing, knowing that any slackening could mean disaster for the men in front of you. This constant, unremitting pressure, both physical and psychological, permeated every rank of the phalanx. Historians still widely debate the precise nature and effectiveness of the othismos, the push in phalanx combat, with some arguing it was a literal, sustained shove of opposing formations, while others suggest it was more a conceptual description of the intense, close-quarters combat once the lines engaged. The psychological toll was immense. The knowledge that retreat was rarely an option, that your fate was tied entirely to the cohesion of the line, created a desperate kind of courage. You couldn't run, because breaking rank meant exposing your comrades and almost certain death for yourself from the rear. Your only hope was to stand, to push, to fight. This intense peer pressure, this shared vulnerability, paradoxically fostered an incredible sense of solidarity and collective will. You were terrified. Yes, but you were terrified together, a bond forged in the crucible of impending death, far stronger than any team spirit felt on a modern football field in Green Bay. Wisconsin. This focus on collective identity meant that personal glory, while admired, was secondary to the success of the Phalanx. Individual acts of bravery were celebrated, but only if they contributed to the overall integrity of the line. A hoplite who broke formation to pursue a personal foe, no matter how valiant, was a liability, a threat to the entire unit. Your highest honor was to hold your position, to stand firm, to die with your shield if necessary, but never to abandon your comrades. It's a powerful lesson in collective responsibility, where the individual truly melts into the whole, a philosophy that contrasts sharply with the rugged individualism celebrated in much of modern American culture. The unyielding discipline also meant that orders were absolute. There was no questioning, no hesitation. When the command to advance was given, you advanced. When the command to brace for impact was given, you braced. Your life depended on instantaneous, unquestioning obedience. This kind of military training stripped away personal initiative in the moment of battle, replacing it with a drilled, almost instinctual response, vital for maintaining the phalanx's integrity. Imagine the chilling precision of a perfectly executed military drill team in a modern parade. But imagine that every movement has immediate, deadly consequences. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the unyielding wall formation. And discipline is the curious phenomenon of the silent prayer stone, where, despite the rigid public nature of phalanx discipline, some hoplites would secretly carry a small, smooth pebble or piece of obsidian in their left hand, clutched tightly beneath their hoplon during the terrifying moments before impact, and silently whisper a personal prayer or a wish for courage, believing the stone absorbed their fear, turning a mundane object into a profound, clandestine spiritual anchor in the face of overwhelming terror. Imagine yourself, a young Athenian hoplite, your heart hammering against your ribs as the enemy phalanx slowly approaches, your grip tightening around a small, smooth stone in your sweating left hand, murmuring a desperate, unspoken plea for strength, hoping this tiny, hidden ritual will keep your knees from buckling and allow you to hold your place in the line. It truly sucked to be so terrified that your only comfort was a secret, silent ritual performed with a pebble, knowing that any outward sign of fear could doom you and your comrades. The battlefield environment itself, even before impact, contributed to the unyielding discipline. The dust kicked up by thousands of marching feet, the sun glinting off bronze, the rhythmic chanting of war cries, all contributed to a sensory overload that heightened the tension and the need for absolute focus on the man next to you. The very air vibrated with anticipation, and the only way to cope was to become one with the collective, to lose your individual self in the vast, armored mass. Ultimately, the phalanx was a terrifying, yet incredibly effective, innovation. It transformed individual warriors into a collective weapon, capable of absorbing and delivering immense shock. But its power came at a profound cost to the individual hoplite. You sacrificed your personal freedom, your individual initiative, and often your life for the sake of the collective. Your identity melted into the wall of bronze, and your greatest glory was simply to hold your place, to not break, to remain an unyielding brick in that living, breathing, terrifying wall. The legacy of the unyielding wall formation and discipline is a powerful reminder of humanity's long history of collective action and the often brutal demands of military discipline. It highlights how the strength of a group can transcend individual limitations, but also the profound personal cost of such intense cohesion. This historical reality underscores the immense value we now place on individual autonomy and freedom of choice, even within the context of team efforts. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own personal space, remember the claustrophobic, disciplined reality of the Greek phalanx, and appreciate the freedom you have to stand as an individual rather than just a part of an unyielding wall. Let's gently return from the chilling, disciplined reality of the unyielding wall formation. And discipline, where every hoplite was a living brick in a human fortress, constantly pushing forward. If Chapter 1 explored the tactical cohesion of the Phalanx, tonight we'll delve into the physical burden, the very skin you lived in, the weighty embrace of the hoplite's equipment. We're going to explore the stark, exhausting reality of iron and bronze hoplite's heavy burden, contemplating how the sheer weight of your armor, shield, and weapons, far from being a mere costume, was a constant, crushing presence, turning every step, every movement, and every breath into an immense physical struggle that tested the very limits of your endurance, even before the fighting began. Imagine yourself now, a hoplite in ancient Greece, not casually throwing on a light jacket before stepping out in a temperate city like San Diego, California, but instead, with the first light of dawn, beginning the arduous process of donning your battle gear, or to give it an American context, picture yourself as a heavily armed knight preparing for a medieval joust in a blazing summer, or a fully kitted out astronaut trying to move efficiently in a bulky spacesuit before a critical mission. The sheer weight and restrictive nature of the gear were paramount. You begin with the tunic, a simple linen garment, perhaps your last comfortable moment for hours. Then comes the cuirass, the breastplate, typically made of bronze. This isn't some lightweight, flexible modern body armor. This is solid, hammered metal, shaped to your torso, incredibly heavy, often weighing anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds, or about the weight of a young toddler, strapped to your chest, constantly pushing down. It restricts your breathing, limits your flexibility, and begins to chafe almost immediately, even before the sweat starts to run. This is the pervasive, often suffocating reality of iron and bronze hoplite's heavy burden, where the very tools meant to protect you simultaneously became your greatest tormentors, turning even simple movements into Herculean feats of endurance, and making every breath a conscious effort. Next, you strap on the greaves, bronze shin guards that extended from your ankles to just below your knees. These offered crucial protection against sword cuts to the legs, but they were rigid and cumbersome, hindering your natural stride. Then, perhaps, the vambraces, bronze arm guards, adding further weight and restricting the free swing of your arms. And on your head, the iconic Corinthian helmet. This was arguably the most recognizable and most restrictive piece of hoplite armor. Made of thick bronze, it completely enclosed your head, leaving only narrow slits for your eyes and a small opening for your mouth. It offered unparalleled protection, but at a severe cost. Your vision was severely limited, a tunnel-like view directly in front of you. Your hearing was muffled, turning the shouts of your comrades and commanders into distant echoes. Breathing was difficult, especially in the heat, as the metal quickly heated up under the sun, turning the inside of your helmet into a suffocating oven. Imagine trying to run a marathon in a metal bucket, with only tiny holes to see and breathe through, and you begin to grasp the immediate claustrophobic reality of this helmet. A common historical truth is that the hoplite's panoply, particularly the bronze cuirass and Corinthian helmet, was exceptionally heavy and cumbersome, significantly limiting the soldier's mobility, vision, and hearing, making endurance as critical as martial skill in phalanx combat. Historians still widely debate the precise average weight of a complete hoplite panoply and how this varied across different periods and regions of ancient Greece. As archaeological finds suggest variations in armor design and material, but the real beast, the true anchor that constantly pulled you down, was the hoplon, your shield. This large circular shield, around 1 meter 3 feet in diameter, was made of wood, often covered in bronze and lined with leather. It weighed a staggering 15 to 20 pounds, like carrying a heavy bowling ball, constantly attached to your left arm. And you didn't just carry it, you wore it. It had a unique double grip system, a central armband, the porpax that you slid your left forearm through, and a hand grip, the antilabe near the rim, that you clutched with your left hand. This design meant the hoplon was effectively strapped to your arm, making it incredibly stable for forming the shield wall, but also making it incredibly difficult to remove or shift. It was a constant, unyielding weight, straining your arm, shoulder, and back with every step, every minute you wore it. Imagine trying to hold a conversation while constantly bracing against the equivalent of a heavy backpack, strapped to your arm, for hours on end in the sweltering heat of a Tennessee summer. It's physically debilitating, even before the enemy is in sight. Then came your weapons. Your primary offensive tool was the dory, a long thrusting spear, typically 7 to 9 feet long, with a bronze or iron spearhead and a bronze butt spike. This spear was not light. It was a substantial piece of wood, designed for piercing armor and flesh. You held it in your right hand, poised to thrust. Its length made it unwieldy in tight spaces, but devastating in the organized ranks of the Phalanx. And if your spear broke, or if the lines truly engaged in close quarters combat, you drew your xyphos, a short, double-edged sword, or a kopis, a heavy, forward-curving sword designed for hacking and slashing. Both were heavy, solid pieces of metal, adding to the cumulative weight you carried. Imagine preparing for battle in a remote outpost in colonial Massachusetts, not just with a musket, but with a full suit of armor, a shield, and multiple heavy weapons, each one a strain on your already aching muscles. The cumulative weight of this full panoply, cuirass, helmet, greaves, vambraces, hoplon, spear, and sword, could easily exceed 60 to 70 pounds. And for some, perhaps even more. That's like carrying a fully loaded military rucksack on a long patrol. But you're not just walking, you're marching for miles, under the blazing Greek sun, in rigid formation, and then expected to engage in a brutal, physically demanding fight. Every muscle in your body would scream in protest. Your shoulders would ache, your back would throb, and your legs would feel like lead. Dehydration would set in quickly, compounded by the heavy, restrictive armor. Your breath would come in ragged gasps, and sweat would stream down your face, stinging your eyes, pooling inside your helmet. This sheer physical burden had a profound impact on how Phalanx combat was fought. It wasn't a battle of speed or agility, it was a test of raw endurance, of who could withstand the oppressive weight, the heat, and the constant strain for longer. Fatigue would set in rapidly, diminishing your strength, slowing your reactions, and clouding your judgment. A hoplite who collapsed from exhaustion, even before a single blow was struck, was a liability, creating a gap in the line that could prove fatal for his comrades. The relentless physical demands meant that only the strong, the disciplined, and the truly enduring could function effectively within the Phalanx. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about iron and bronze hoplites' heavy burden is the curious phenomenon of the ritual of the hidden pebble, where, despite the rigid uniform appearance of the hoplite Phalanx, some experienced soldiers on exceptionally hot days would discreetly slip a small, smooth, cool stone, often sourced from a riverbed, into the interior of their bronze helmets, pressing it against their temples, a tiny, personal act of desperate physical comfort, hoping the minute coolness would offer a momentary respite from the oppressive heat and prevent heat stroke. Turning a mundane pebble into a vital, clandestine tool of survival? Imagine yourself a veteran hoplite sweating profusely inside your suffocating Corinthian helmet, the sun beating down mercilessly as you carefully, almost imperceptibly, adjust a small, cool pebble against your temple, hoping its slight chill will clear the fog from your brain and help you endure just a few more agonizing minutes. A truly poignant act of desperate, hidden self-care in a situation designed for relentless suffering? It truly sucked to be so physically miserable that your only hope for comfort was a secret pebble in your helmet. Battling the elements while simultaneously preparing for deadly combat. The psychological burden of the weight was also immense. It was a constant reminder of the ordeal to come, a physical manifestation of the heavy responsibility you carried. It limited your peripheral vision, making you feel trapped and claustrophobic. It muffled the sounds of the outside world, creating a terrifying sense of isolation even amidst thousands of men. This sensory deprivation, combined with the extreme physical exertion, would push many to the brink of panic and exhaustion. You were not just fighting the enemy, you were fighting your own body, your own limitations, trying desperately to overcome the oppressive weight that threatened to pin you to the earth. This reality explains why training and physical conditioning were so vital for hoplites. They couldn't afford to be weak or out of shape. Their lives and the lives of their entire community depended on their ability to endure, to march, to stand, and to fight under this crushing burden. Young men, as explored in childhood's harsh dawn from Chapter 2, would have been trained for this physical ordeal from a young age, building the strength and stamina necessary to become effective hoplites. The gymnasium wasn't just for philosophical debate, it was a brutal training ground for warfare, forging bodies capable of carrying the burden of battle. The very slowness and ponderousness of the Phalanx was a direct consequence of this heavy armor. It couldn't maneuver quickly, it could only advance, push, and rotate as a single massive unit. This lack of agility meant that battlefields had to be chosen carefully. Flat, open plains where the Phalanx could deploy and maximize its strength without being hampered by difficult terrain. It was a trade-off: unparalleled defensive strength and shock potential in exchange for limited speed and flexibility. Historians still widely debate the long-term impact of carrying such heavy equipment on the hoplite's body, particularly regarding chronic injuries and skeletal changes, as direct medical records from the period are scarce and rely heavily on modern forensic analysis of skeletal remains. The legacy of iron and bronze hoplites' heavy burden is a profound reminder of the physical demands of ancient warfare and the incredible resilience of the human body under extreme duress. It highlights how technology, even in its most rudimentary forms, profoundly shapes the nature of conflict and the experiences of those who fight. This historical reality underscores the immense physical comforts and advanced protective gear enjoyed by modern soldiers, a stark contrast to the grueling reality of the hoplite. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the soft weight of your blanket, remember the crushing burden of the hoplite's armor and appreciate the freedom of movement and physical comfort that you now possess, a luxury purchased by centuries of human innovation and the enduring struggle against physical limitation. Let's gently return from the sheer physical agony of iron and bronze hoplite's heavy burden, where every piece of equipment was a tormentor, straining muscles and restricting breath. If Chapter 2 explored the crushing weight of the hoplite's gear, tonight we'll delve into the very heart of the conflict, the chaotic, brutal dance of close-quarters combat itself. We're going to explore the stark, unromanticized reality of the thrust-and-push combat mechanics, contemplating how the engagement of two phalanxes was not a series of individual duels, but a relentless collective struggle of mass and momentum, where survival depended less on graceful skill and more on brute force, unwavering discipline, and the terrifying, incessant pressure of the shield wall, turning the battlefield into a meat grinder. Imagine yourself, now, a hoplite in ancient Greece, not watching a choreographed fight scene in an action movie in a comfortable theater in Orlando, Florida, but standing in the front ranks of your phalanx, the enemy line drawing closer with every agonizing breath. Or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a Union soldier in the American Civil War, bracing for a bayonet charge against a Confederate line in the dense fog of an early morning battle, or a World War I infantryman enduring a relentless barrage of artillery fire, waiting for the whistle to go over the top into a chaotic, close-quarters melee. The air is thick with dust and the metallic scent of anticipation. Your heart pounds like a drum against your ribs, a frantic rhythm against the steady, rhythmic chant of your comrades. You can now clearly see the faces of the enemy, distorted by their own bronze helmets, their eyes wide with the same mixture of fear and grim determination that you feel. This is the pervasive, often terrifying reality of the thrust and push combat mechanics, where the grand strategy of warfare distilled down to a primal, suffocating struggle for inches, turning the battlefield into a terrifying, visceral ordeal where every thrust, every push, and every gasp for air dictated your immediate survival. The moment of collision. The impact of two phalanxes was rarely a sudden, dramatic crash. Instead, it was often a more gradual, grinding engagement, a process of two immovable objects meeting. As the lines converged, the initial contact would be the tips of the dory, your long, heavy spear. Remember that unwieldy beast from Chapter 2. The front rank of your phalanx would extend their spears, creating a bristling hedge of points aimed at the enemy's faces, necks, and exposed limbs. This initial volley of thrust would be met by the enemy's own spears, turning the space between the two lines into a deadly, chaotic tangle of wood and bronze. Imagine a giant, monstrous hedgehog, bristling with lethal spikes, slowly, inexorably moving towards another, equally dangerous hedgehog, and you're at the very front of one of them. This wasn't about fencing. The close confines of the phalanx, the heavy armor, and the sheer number of men pressing forward meant that precision was often impossible. Instead, it was about repeated, powerful thrusts, aiming for any opening. You'd brace your spear against your hip or under your arm, using the collective momentum of the phalanx to drive the point home. If you managed to hit, the impact would be jarring, the sickening crunch of bronze against bone, or the tearing sound of fabric and flesh, and then you'd quickly withdraw, preparing for the next thrust, hoping your spear didn't get stuck or snap. The noise would be deafening, the clatter of spears, the shouts of men, the groans of the wounded, all amplified by the enclosed space of your Corinthian helmet, that vision and hearing. Reducer from Chapter 2. A common historical truth is that phalanx combat, particularly at the point of collision, was characterized by intense close quarters spear thrusting and the brutal othismos, or push, where mass and collective force were paramount over individual skill. Historians still widely debate the exact frequency with which spears broke or became unusable during the initial clash, and how quickly combat devolved into sword fighting across different battles and periods. Inevitably, spears would break. The thin shafts of wood, no matter how sturdy, could not withstand the repeated stress of impact against armor, shields, or bone. When your dory snapped or became hopelessly entangled in the enemy line, you would immediately drop its broken shaft and draw your xyphos or kopis, your shorter sword also introduced in Chapter 2. Now the fighting became even more brutal and intimate. You were pressed against the enemy, shield to shield, face to face, locked in a desperate struggle. The sword was a stabbing weapon, designed for short, powerful thrusts into gaps in armor, aiming for the soft underbelly, the exposed throat, or the armpit. Imagine being in a crowded subway car during rush hour in New York City, but everyone has a knife, and they're all trying to stab each other. That's a fraction of the claustrophobic terror. The othismos, the push, which we first touched on in Chapter 1, was not just an initial collision, it was a sustained, agonizing effort. The men in the rear ranks constantly pushed against the backs of the men in front, adding their weight to the collective momentum. This meant that the front ranks were under immense pressure, being simultaneously pushed forward by their own comrades and resisted by the enemy line. It was like being caught in a human vice, slowly, inexorably tightening. Your muscles would burn, your lungs would ache, and your entire body would be screaming from the strain. The goal was to break the enemy's formation, to create gaps, to force them to falter and rout. It wasn't about killing every man, it was about overwhelming their will to resist. The ground beneath your feet would quickly become treacherous. Blood would slick the earth, making it slippery. Broken spears, discarded shields, and the bodies of the fallen would create obstacles, tripping hazards that could instantly compromise your balance and expose you to a fatal blow. Imagine fighting on a frozen pond in Minnesota, but instead of ice, it's a mixture of mud, blood, and shattered equipment. Staying on your feet, maintaining your balance while pushing and thrusting, was a constant, exhausting challenge. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the thrust and push combat mechanics is the curious phenomenon of the forgotten water skin, where, despite the immense physical exertion and the sweltering heat of battle, many hoplites in the chaos of the Othismos would inadvertently drop or lose their small, personal leather water skins, leading to agonizing dehydration as the battle wore on. A silent torment that often contributed to exhaustion and collapse more than any single enemy blow, transforming a simple and essential item into a crucial, often tragically lost, key to endurance. Imagine yourself, a hoplite in the midst of the brutal push, your throat parched, your head swimming from dehydration as you desperately reach for your water skin, only to realize it's gone, slipped away in the confusion, leaving you to endure the escalating agony of thirst while still fighting for your life. A truly miserable and often overlooked aspect of combat. It truly sucked to be so utterly consumed by the fight that you lost the one thing that could offer you vital, immediate relief, leaving you to face both the enemy and the internal torment of dehydration. The psychological impact of this kind of combat was immense. The claustrophobia of the tight ranks, the inability to maneuver, the constant push and thrust, and the sheer brutality of the close quarters fighting would combine into an overwhelming sensory and emotional assault. You were surrounded by death, the groans of the wounded, the screams of the dying, the smell of blood and sweat. There was no escape, no retreat. Your only option was to stand, to push, to fight, to endure. This constant, unremitting pressure on both physical and mental would break weaker men, forcing them to rout and run, often meeting a quicker death from pursuing enemies. The role of the men in the rear ranks, while not as immediately lethal, was no less crucial. They maintained the integrity of the formation, ensuring that no gaps opened up from behind. They also served as a constant source of fresh impetus for the push, their bodies acting as a living ramrod. They were constantly shifting, adapting to the movements of the men in front, bracing, pushing, and perhaps occasionally stepping over a fallen comrade to fill a new gap. Their vision might have been obscured by the bodies in front, but the sounds and the constant pressure would tell them everything they needed to know. This close quarters fighting also meant that identifying friends from foes was often difficult amidst the chaos. With helmets obscuring faces and bodies pressed together, distinguishing between the enemy and your comrades could become a terrifying challenge. Particularly as the lines began to fray, misdirected blows, accidental injuries, and friendly fire were likely grim realities of this kind of fighting. The fog of war in the Phalanx was a literal suffocating cloud of dust, sweat, and terror. Historians still widely debate the extent to which hoplite battles were decisive pushes, or if they often devolved into more fluid. Individual duels once the front ranks became entangled, varying by battlefield conditions and the discipline of the specific forces involved. The duration of these clashes could vary, but even short engagements were brutally exhausting. Minutes could feel like hours under such intense strain. The fight would continue until one side broke formation and ran, or until one side was simply too exhausted and decimated to continue the push. The rout, once it began, was often the deadliest part of the battle. As the fleeing soldiers shed their heavy armor, remember the heavy burden from Chapter 2 to escape, becoming easy prey for the pursuing victorious Phalanx, now free to pursue and slaughter the broken enemy. The legacy of the thrust and push combat mechanics is a chilling reminder of the raw, brutal efficiency of ancient warfare and the incredible, often terrible, demands it placed on the individual soldier. It highlights how military strategy can reduce human beings to cogs in a larger, deadly machine, where personal skill matters less than collective force. This historical reality underscores the profound difference between modern, technologically advanced warfare and the visceral, intimate brutality of hand-to-hand combat. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the soft comfort of your bed, remember the terrifying claustrophobic press of the Greek Phalanx, and appreciate the freedom from such intense physical and psychological torment that you now possess. a world away from the blood-soaked plains of ancient Greece. Let's gently return from the brutal, unyielding press of the thrust and push combat mechanics, where every inch was fought for in a claustrophobic, metal-on-metal grind. If Chapter 3 explored the sheer physical terror of collision, tonight we'll delve into the internal world of the hoplite, the unseen battles waged within his own mind. We're going to explore the stark, raw reality of Beyond the Shield. Fear and courage, contemplating how, even amidst the rigid discipline and collective strength of the Phalanx, each individual soldier grappled with an overwhelming, primal fear of death, injury, and dishonor. And how the concept of courage in ancient Greece was less about reckless abandon and more about the agonizing, conscious choice to stand firm, to endure. Despite the terrifying instinct to flee, imagine yourself now, a hoplite standing in the ranks, not calmly watching a horror movie from the safety of your couch in a quiet, suburban home in Phoenix, Arizona, but acutely aware that the monster is real. It's armed, and it's charging directly at you. Or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a young soldier in Vietnam, hunkered down during a firefight, the roar of machine guns and screams of comrades filling the air, or a firefighter rushing into a burning building. Every instinct screaming for you to turn back. But duty, and the need to protect those beside you, compels you forward. Your body is screaming for flight. Your stomach is a knot of ice. Your mouth dry, and your hands tremble despite your grip on your dory, your unwieldy spear from Chapter 2 and the strap of your hoplon, that heavy shield from Chapter 2, the roar of the approaching enemy, the rhythmic chant of their war cries, the glint of their bronze against the sun. Every sensory input is designed to paralyze you with terror. This is the pervasive, often overwhelming, reality of Beyond the Shield. Fear and courage where the ultimate test was not just physical strength, but the agonizing, internal struggle against the most primal human instinct to survive, turning every beat of your pounding heart into a silent, desperate plea for composure. The fear was multifaceted. First, there was the immediate visceral terror of physical harm. You knew, with chilling certainty, that you might be impaled by a spear, hacked by a sword, or crushed underfoot. There was no concept of medical evacuation, no advanced trauma care, a stark contrast to sickness and superstition from Chapter 7. A serious wound often meant a slow, agonizing death on the battlefield, or a lifetime of debilitating injury if you survived. The sight of fallen comrades, their bodies mangled and bleeding, would serve as a grim preview of your own potential fate, fueling a raw, animalistic dread that clawed at your insides. Then, there was the fear of dishonor. In ancient Greek society, particularly for hoplites, cowardice was arguably worse than death. To flee the battlefield, to throw down your hoplon, a common practice for rooting hoplites, as dropping your heavy shield made you faster but exposed your back and dishonored you, was the ultimate disgrace. You would be ostracized by your community, your family would bear the shame, and your name would be forever tainted. This social pressure, this profound fear of public contempt, was a powerful motivator. It created a chilling dilemma: face almost certain death on the battlefield, or face a life of unbearable shame and social exclusion back home. For many, the latter was a fate worse than any wound. Imagine living in a small, tight-knit community in colonial New England, where your entire identity and your family's reputation rested on your perceived bravery in battle. And the thought of being branded a coward was a fate worse than death itself. A common historical truth is that fear was a universal experience for hoplites on the battlefield, stemming from the immediate threat of death and injury, as well as the profound social fear of dishonor and ostracism for perceived cowardice. Courage within the Phalanx was defined not as the absence of fear, but as the conscious choice to suppress it and remain in formation despite overwhelming terror. Historians still widely debate the extent to which the rigid social pressure of Hellenic society genuinely instilled courage versus merely forcing suppression of flight instincts, and how this varied among individuals. The courage of the hoplite, therefore, was rarely a fearless, reckless abandon. It was an act of willpower, a conscious decision to stand firm despite every fiber of your being screaming for you to run. It was the ability to suppress your instinct for self-preservation, to override your primal fear with a learned discipline and an overwhelming sense of duty to your city-state and your comrades. You didn't feel brave? You acted brave, forcing your trembling legs to remain rooted, forcing your hand to grip your spear, forcing your eyes to meet the enemy's charge. This was a profound internal struggle, waged moment by moment, breath by agonizing breath. The tight confines of the Phalanx, that unyielding wall from Chapter 1, simultaneously amplified and mitigated this fear. On one hand, the claustrophobia and the inability to escape intensified the terror. You were trapped, nowhere to run, surrounded by the impending chaos. On the other hand, the very proximity of your comrades offered a strange kind of comfort. You weren't alone in your fear. You could feel the man next to you trembling, hear his ragged breathing, and know that he, too, was battling his own internal demons. This shared vulnerability, this collective fear, paradoxically forged a powerful bond, a sense of solidarity that bolstered individual courage. You couldn't abandon them, and they wouldn't abandon you. It's like being in a crowded, collapsing building, and the only thing keeping you from panicking is the shared terror and the desperate reliance on the strangers pressed around you. Far more intense than any team-building exercise. The sheer noise of battle, the clang of bronze, the guttural shouts, the screams of the wounded, the rhythmic stomping of thousands of feet would contribute to a profound sensory overload. Your ears would ring, your vision would tunnel, and your body would be flooded with adrenaline. This physical response to extreme stress could lead to a disorienting, almost dreamlike state where time seemed to slow down or speed up. Some might find a strange clarity in this chaos, a heightened focus on the immediate task of thrusting and pushing. Others might be overwhelmed, falling into a panicked paralysis or a desperate flight. The ability to function under such sensory assault was a testament to extraordinary mental fortitude, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about Beyond the Shield. Fear and courage is the curious phenomenon of the whispered mantra, where, in the overwhelming din and terror of the approaching Phalanx clash, some hoplites would silently, almost imperceptibly, repeat a specific, short phrase or a line from an ancient poem or religious invocation to themselves. Over and over, within the confines of their helmets, using this internal vocalization as a form of self-soothing and mental anchoring to drown out the external chaos and maintain their focus. Turning a simple repetition into a vital, clandestine psychological shield against panic. Imagine yourself a young Spartan hoplite, standing firm as the Persians approach, your heart a drum in your chest, silently, desperately repeating a line from Tertius, a poet who glorified dying in battle, or a prayer to Ares, the god of war, hoping these whispered words will be enough to quell the rising tide of pure, unadulterated terror and keep you from breaking formation. It truly sucked to be so utterly overwhelmed that your only defense against your own mind was a silent, frantic repetition, hoping it would be enough to keep you from shame and death. The role of the battle cry was also crucial. As the two phalanxes closed in, the coordinated shout, the paean, would erupt from your side. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a way to pump yourselves up, to intimidate the enemy, and crucially, to drown out your own inner fears. The collective roar created a powerful sense of unity, a shared defiance against the overwhelming terror. It was a primal, almost animalistic expression of collective will, designed to steel your nerves and unnerve the foe. Imagine a massive crowd at a modern sports event, all roaring in unison, but with the added intensity that your collective scream is meant to terrify the people you are about to try and kill, far more potent than any chant in a stadium in Seattle. Washington, leadership, particularly from the front ranks, also played a significant role in fostering courage. The presence of your commander, leading from the front, sharing the same risks, provided a powerful example. Knowing that men of high standing were willing to face the same terrors, to put their lives on the line for the city, instilled a sense of duty and determination in the ranks. This shared sacrifice elevated the act of fighting beyond mere survival. It became a civic duty, a testament to your commitment to your community. This kind of leadership, a personal example of courage in the face of death, is an enduring principle that transcends military history. Historians still widely debate the precise ways in which Greek city-states fostered a culture of courage and civic duty among their hoplites, and the extent to which rhetoric and social conditioning were effective in overcoming primal fear in battle. The aftermath of battle, whether victory or defeat, would also test courage in a different way. The sight of the dead and wounded, the cries for help, the grim task of identifying fallen comrades, these were the sobering realities that followed the adrenaline-fueled chaos. While the immediate threat might have passed, the psychological scars would linger, a theme we'll explore more in Homecoming's Shadow in Chapter 9. The experience of combat, the confronting of your own mortality, and the witnessing of such raw violence would forever change you. Ultimately, hoplite courage was a complex, arduous achievement. It wasn't about the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. It was about facing down your most primal instincts, choosing duty over self-preservation, and standing shoulder to shoulder with your comrades in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a testament to the power of social conditioning, collective identity, and the profound human capacity to endure, even in the most terrifying circumstances, for the sake of honor and community. The legacy of Beyond the Shield. Fear and courage is a profound human story, reminding us that courage is often born not from a lack of fear, but from the deliberate choice to act despite it. It highlights the immense psychological demands of ancient warfare and the often unseen internal battles waged by those who fought. This historical reality underscores the enduring relevance of concepts like bravery, duty, and solidarity in the face of adversity, whether on a battlefield or in our own daily lives. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet safety of your surroundings, remember the internal struggle of the hoplite, battling his own fear to stand firm in the face of overwhelming terror, and appreciate the freedom you have to choose your battles, and to face your own fears on your own terms, in a world that offers far more options than just stand and fight or die. Let's gently return from the agonizing internal struggle of Beyond the Shield. Fear and courage, where the hoplite wrestled with primal terror and the grim demands of honor. If Chapter 4 explored the unseen battles within the mind, tonight we'll plunge into the overwhelming, often sickening reality of the battlefield as experienced through all five senses. We're going to explore the visceral, inescapable reality of the scent of battle sensory overload, contemplating how the chaos of a Greek phalanx engagement was a horrifying symphony of deafening sounds, acrid smells, gruesome sights, and the raw, unadulterated taste of adrenaline and desperation, transforming the battlefield into an assault on every fiber of your being. Imagine yourself, now, a hoplite in ancient Greece, not enjoying the quiet comfort of a movie theater with surround sound in Dallas, Texas, but instead standing shoulder to shoulder in the front rank, just moments before impact, or to give it an American context. Picture yourself as a combat medic during the chaos of the Normandy landings, or a firefighter battling a raging inferno, where every sense is bombarded by sights, sounds, and smells that overwhelm and disorient. The sun beats down relentlessly, a silent witness to the approaching horror. Your Corinthian helmet, that heavy, restrictive bronze bucket from Chapter 2, muffles some sound, but amplifies others, trapping you in a claustrophobic echo chamber of your own ragged breathing and pounding heart. Then, the world erupts. This is the pervasive, often overwhelming reality of the scent of battle sensory overload, where the sheer intensity of the battlefield assaulted your senses, threatening to break your composure and reduce you to a primal state of panic, turning every moment into a struggle to process the unbearable symphony of war. First, the sound. Before the clash, there was the rhythmic tramp of thousands of armored feet, the metallic rustle of bronze on bronze, the strained grunts of men under immense weight. Then, the opposing paean. The war chant would rise to a deafening crescendo, a guttural, terrifying roar designed to intimidate and disorient. As the two phalanxes closed, the air would fill with the collective shouts of command, the frenzied cries of hoplites, and the sharp, piercing note of the trumpets or flutes the Alloy used to maintain rhythm and morale. When the lines finally met that brutal thrust and push from Chapter 3, the sound would transform into an indescribable cacophony, the sickening crunch of wood and bone as spears impacted shields and bodies, the metallic clang of bronze against bronze as swords engaged, the desperate grunts and gasps of men locked in a struggle for survival, and the chilling screams of the wounded and dying. Imagine being at a heavy metal concert where the speakers are constantly exploding, and every single instrument is out of tune, yet all are screaming directly into your ears, amplified 1,000-fold. This overwhelming roar would drown out thought, forcing you to rely on instinct and the subtle cues of the men immediately around you. Then, the smell. As the battle wore on, a truly abominable stench would permeate the air, assaulting your nostrils and coating your throat. The sharp metallic tang of fresh blood, pooling on the dusty ground and soaking into tunics. The pungent odor of sweat from thousands of straining, terrified bodies, mingled with the acrid scent of fear and adrenaline. The sweet, sickly smell of human waste, often involuntarily released by men in their terror. And as injuries mounted, the coppery scent of exposed entrails, the fetid odor of ruptured organs, and the grim, earthy smell of disturbed soil mixed with decay. If the battle lasted and bodies began to cool, the cloying aroma of death, of decaying flesh, would start to mingle with everything else. Imagine walking through a slaughterhouse on a hot summer day, with the added elements of human terror and the absence of any ventilation, and you begin to grasp the truly nauseating olfactory experience of the Phalanx battlefield. This pervasive stench would cling to your clothes and your hair, your very skin, long after the fighting ended. A common historical truth is that Greek hoplite battles were characterized by an overwhelming sensory experience, with deafening noise, acrid smells of blood and sweat, and gruesome sights contributing to a highly disorienting and terrifying environment for the soldiers. Historians still widely debate the long-term effects of this sensory overload on the mental health and resilience of hoplites, as specific ancient accounts of post-traumatic stress are limited and rely on modern interpretation. The sight was no less horrific. Through the narrow eye slits of your Corinthian helmet, your vision would be largely confined to the brutal reality immediately in front of you. You'd see the enemy's distorted faces, their eyes wide with fear or rage, just inches from yours. You'd witness, in horrifying detail, the impact of spears and swords, the spurting blood, the collapse of bodies, the glint of metal piercing flesh. The ground would quickly become a gruesome tableau of fallen comrades and enemies, a treacherous carpet of mangled limbs, shattered shields, and discarded weapons. As the line pressed forward, you'd be forced to step over, or even stumble upon, the bodies of the dead and dying, their open, sightless eyes staring up at the unforgiving sky, the sheer volume of human suffering, unfolding right before your eyes, would be seared into your memory, a grim tapestry of raw, visceral violence, far more disturbing than any gruesome image you might accidentally encounter online in your quiet home in Portland, Oregon. And then there was the taste of adrenaline, sharp and metallic, coating your tongue. The taste of dust, kicked up by thousands of feet and clinging to your throat, exacerbating the thirst. Remember the forgotten water skin from Chapter 3? The taste of your own vomit, if the sheer terror or exertion forced your stomach to betray you, And most grimly, the potential taste of blood, your own, or that of others, if the impact of a blow sent a spray of crimson into your mouth. This confluence of overwhelming sensory input, assaulting every nerve ending, would push you to the very brink of human endurance, transforming the act of combat into a battle against your own breaking point. The sense of touch was also constant and overwhelming. The suffocating weight of your panoply, that full suit of heavy armor from Chapter 2, pressing down on your shoulders and chest, the rough feel of the hoplon strap against your forearm, chafing your skin, the vibration of countless footsteps pounding the earth, reverberating up through your legs, the jarring impact of shield against shield, body against body. As the Othismos, the constant push from Chapter 3 took its toll. The slick web of warm feel of blood, clinging to your hands and arms, and the terrifying, intimate sensation of another human body, an enemy, pressing against yours, locked in a desperate embrace of life and death, their breath hot on your face, their muscles straining against yours. It's like being caught in a powerful, suffocating undertow, unable to escape the crushing pressure of the human tide. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the scent of battle sensory overload is the curious phenomenon of the whispered tally, where, amidst the overwhelming sensory chaos of the Phalanx clash, some hoplites, to maintain their sanity and focus, would subconsciously or even consciously, if briefly, begin to count certain repeated sounds or sights. The clang of a specific type of helmet, the number of successful spear thrusts, the rhythm of a comrade's grunts, turning these grim tallies into a form of mental anchoring against the terrifying sensory dissolution, transforming a repetitive observation into a desperate, clandestine act of psychological self-preservation. Imagine yourself, a hoplite overwhelmed by the cacophony of battle, your mind teetering on the edge of panic, as you involuntarily begin to count the metallic clink, clink, clink of a particular enemy's shield as they push against yours, using this mundane, repetitive observation as a desperate lifeline to prevent your mind from completely unraveling in the face of such unbearable sensory assault. It truly sucked to be so utterly bombarded by the horrors of battle that your only escape was to find a bizarre, repetitive mental anchor, reducing your conscious thought to a desperate tally of sounds or sights, just to maintain a fragile hold on reality. This relentless sensory assault was designed to break the enemy, to turn their disciplined ranks into a panicked rout, but it also took an immense toll on the victors. The images, sounds, and smells of battle would linger long after the fighting ended, replaying in your mind, haunting your dreams. The constant adrenaline surge would leave you utterly drained, physically and emotionally. The sensory overload contributed to the profound psychological scars that many hoplites carried, a grim legacy of a world where survival meant enduring the unbearable, a precursor to the trauma we'll discuss in Homecoming's Shadow in Chapter 9. Historians still widely debate the full extent of the psychological and sensory impact of phalanx warfare on the individual hoplite. As direct first-person accounts are rare and often filtered through rhetorical conventions, making it challenging to fully reconstruct the subjective experience of sensory overload in ancient combat. The lack of personal space, the constant pressure of bodies, the inability to escape the horrors unfolding around you, all contributed to this pervasive sensory nightmare. You were a single node in a larger, unfeeling machine, unable to shield yourself from the sights and sounds of carnage, forced to absorb every horrifying detail. There was no disengagement, no respite, no safe zone once the battle was joined. You were entirely immersed in the brutal reality of it, a forced participant in a visceral horror show. The legacy of the scent of battle. Sensory overload is a chilling reminder of the raw, unadulterated brutality of ancient warfare and the profound human capacity to endure unimaginable sensory assaults. It highlights how the experience of conflict is not just about strategy or skill, but about the overwhelming impact on the human body and mind. This historical reality underscores the immense physical and psychological protections, however imperfect, afforded to modern soldiers. and provides a stark contrast to a time when every sense was an open conduit to the terrors of the battlefield. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the gentle hum of your home and the quiet comfort of your own senses, remember the cacophony, the stench, and the horrors that assaulted the hoplite, and appreciate the profound peace of your own quiet, safe world, far removed from the overwhelming sensory maelstrom of ancient combat. Let's gently return from the overwhelming, terrifying sensory assault of the scent of battle sensory overload, where the battlefield drowned the hoplite in a horrifying cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells. If Chapter 5 explored the external chaos, tonight we'll delve into the internal anchor, the vital human connection that often made the unbearable bearable. We're going to explore the profound, often unspoken, reality of brotherhood of bronze comradeship and trust, contemplating how, amidst the brutal anonymity of the Phalanx and the individual terror of combat, the unbreakable bonds forged between soldiers, neighbors, friends, and sometimes even relatives became the ultimate source of strength, turning mutual reliance into a sacred covenant that overshadowed even the fear of death. Imagine yourself, now, a hoplite, not isolating yourself from the world by putting on noise-canceling headphones in your quiet apartment in Seattle. Washington? But instead, press so tightly against your comrades in the Phalanx that you can feel the warmth of their bodies, hear their ragged breathing, and perhaps even smell their fear, or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a firefighter, linked by a lifeline to your partner, moving through a smoke-filled building, relying completely on their presence and training, or a member of an elite military unit, where the bond with your teammates is paramount, and failure to support them is unthinkable, far more intense than any team-building exercise in a corporate retreat. Your life and the life of your city-state rests not just on your individual courage, but on the unwavering presence and reliability of the men immediately to your left and right, and those pushing from behind. This is the pervasive, often life-saving reality of brotherhood of bronze comradeship and trust, where the rigid demands of the formation forged an emotional and physical interdependence so profound that it often became the primary motivator for holding the line, turning the shared ordeal into an unbreakable bond that transcended mere acquaintance. The very structure of the Phalanx, that unyielding wall from Chapter 1, inherently fostered this deep sense of comradeship. Remember the design of the hoplon, your shield, that heavy, cumbersome piece of protection from Chapter 2. It protected the man to your left, leaving your own right side exposed. This wasn't just a tactical arrangement, it was a physical manifestation of mutual dependence. You were literally trusting the man on your left to keep you alive, and he was trusting you. This immediate, constant reliance on your neighbor's steadfastness created an intimacy born of shared vulnerability. There was no hiding, no slacking. Your failure was his immediate danger, and vice versa. It's a bit like two mountain climbers roped together on a perilous ascent. Their survival depends entirely on the strength and trustworthiness of the other, far more critical than any casual trust between coworkers in a typical office in San Francisco, California. This bond was often reinforced by the fact that hoplites typically fought alongside their fellow citizens, neighbors, and even family members. Unlike professional armies drawn from disparate regions, Greek hoplites were citizen soldiers. You might be standing next to the farmer whose land bordered yours, the potter whose wares you bought, or even your own brother or father. This deep, pre-existing social fabric made the military bond even stronger. You weren't just fighting for an abstract ideal of your city-state. You were fighting for them. You knew their families, their homes, their dreams. The thought of abandoning them, of letting them down, was often a more powerful deterrent to flight than any fear of the enemy. A common historical truth is that the effectiveness of the Greek phalanx relied heavily on the intense camaraderie and mutual trust among its citizen soldiers. As their lives literally depended on the unwavering cohesion of the shield wall formed by their comrades, this bond was often strengthened by pre-existing social ties within the community from which the hoplites were drawn. Historians still widely debate the extent to which this comradeship genuinely alleviated individual fear, or merely provided a stronger social imperative to suppress it, and how the psychological burden of mutual reliance impacted soldiers who lost close comrades in battle. This deep reliance on each other permeated every aspect of training and combat. During drills, you'd learn to move as one, to respond to commands in perfect unison, knowing that any individual error could ripple through the ranks. In the heat of battle, when fear and courage from Chapter 4 battled within you, the presence of your comrades, their unwavering resolve, their shared struggle against the sensory overload from Chapter 5, would act as a powerful anchor. You wouldn't just hold your position for your city, you'd hold it for the man next to you, whose life depended on your steadfastness. His presence, his familiar face even if obscured by the helmet's slit, his ragged breath beside you. These were the tangible, immediate reasons to push on, to keep fighting, to never break. The shared ordeal of battle also forged an incredibly powerful, albeit grim, kind of intimacy. You saw your comrades at their most vulnerable, terrified, exhausted, wounded. You witnessed their courage, their resilience, and their agony. This shared experience of facing down death together, of surviving the impossible, created a bond that often lasted a lifetime. After the battle, whether in victory or defeat, you would share the quiet moments of relief, the grim task of tending to the wounded, and the somber rituals for the fallen. These experiences, raw and visceral, bound you together in a way that daily life rarely could. It's like a deep, unspoken understanding between first responders or military veterans who have faced extreme danger together. They've seen each other at their worst and their best, and that shared crucible creates an unbreakable connection, far deeper than any casual friendship. The trust extended beyond the immediate line. The men in the ranks behind you, the pushers from Chapter 3, were equally vital. You trusted them to provide the relentless momentum, to fill any gaps, to not falter and expose your rear. Their physical pressure on your back was a constant reminder of their support, a tangible reassurance that you were not fighting alone. This created a sense of layered trust, a human chain of reliability that extended throughout the entire formation. Imagine building a human pyramid, but if any person at the bottom falters, the entire structure collapses, with deadly consequences. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about Brotherhood of Bronze comradeship and trust is the curious phenomenon of the whispered promise, where, amidst the deafening chaos of the Phalanx clash, some hoplites would, in the brief lulls or moments of extreme terror, quickly and subtly whisper a short, almost indiscernible promise to the comrade next to them, perhaps a vow to protect their family if they fell, or a simple, desperate affirmation of, "I'm here," or "Don't break." A tiny, clandestine exchange of psychological reassurance that forged an even deeper, desperate bond in the face of imminent death, turning a fleeting moment into a profound testament to mutual care. Imagine yourself, a hoplite, your face grim with determination, as you feel the subtle pressure of your comrade's shoulder against yours, and you quickly, almost imperceptibly, lean in and whisper, "Your family will be cared for," or "We stand together." Knowing that these few words, exchanged in the heart of chaos, are a sacred vow that might be your last, and that they carry the weight of both your lives. It truly sucked to be in such a terrifying situation that your deepest expressions of solidarity had to be whispered and fleeting, yet carried such immense life-or-death significance. This profound sense of solidarity also played a critical role in preventing routes. While fear was rampant, as we know from Chapter 4, the thought of abandoning your comrades, of being the one who broke the line and exposed them to the enemy, was often too strong to overcome. The shame of letting down your fellow citizens, of being seen as a coward by the very people you lived and worked with, was a powerful social pressure that enforced discipline and cohesion. It was a moral imperative, a fundamental aspect of Greek civic virtue. Even in defeat, the bonds of comradeship would often endure. Surviving hoplites would share the collective grief for their fallen, the grim task of recovering bodies, and the long, difficult journey home, a theme we will delve into in Homecoming's Shadow in Chapter 9. The shared experience of battle, whether victorious or not, created a unique fraternity, a common understanding that transcended ordinary civilian life. These were the men who had seen you at your weakest and your strongest, who had faced death beside you, and who would forever hold a special place in your memory. Historians still widely debate the extent to which the deep bonds of comradeship in the Phalanx contributed to a higher incidence of what we now call survivor's guilt among those who returned from particularly devastating battles. Given the close personal ties between soldiers, the ritualistic aspects of hoplite warfare also reinforced these bonds. Before battle, shared sacrifices to the gods, communal meals, and collective prayers would bind the men together, emphasizing their shared destiny and purpose. After a victory, shared celebrations, the division of spoils and collective thanksgivings further cemented these relationships. These rituals transformed individual anxieties into a collective act of faith and shared purpose, strengthening the emotional fabric of the Phalanx. The legacy of Brotherhood of Bronze comradeship and trust is a timeless testament to the enduring power of human connection, especially in the face of extreme adversity. It highlights how shared struggle can forge bonds stronger than any individual fear or ambition, and how mutual reliance can be a profound source of strength. This historical reality underscores the universal human need for belonging, for trust, and for the support of a community, lessons that resonate far beyond the ancient battlefield. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the warmth of your own cherished relationships, remember the unbreakable bonds of the Greek Phalanx and appreciate the comfort and strength you draw from your own circle of trust, a modern echo of that ancient brotherhood forged in bronze and blood. Let's gently return from the profound, unbreakable bonds of Brotherhood of Bronze. Comradeship and trust, where the hoplite found solace and strength in the unwavering presence of his comrades. If Chapter 6 explored the emotional anchor of the Phalanx, tonight we'll delve into the grim, visceral aftermath of combat, the chilling reality of what happens when the iron and bronze fail. We're going to explore the stark, unvarnished reality of wounds and blood. Brutal aftermath. Contemplating how the limited medical knowledge, the types of weapons used, and the sheer chaos of battle often meant that a wound, no matter how minor it might seem today, was a potential death sentence. Turning the battlefield into a gruesome tableau of suffering and despair, imagine yourself, now, a hoplite in ancient Greece, not casually applying a bandage to a minor cut in your perfectly stocked first aid kit in your suburban home in Atlanta, Georgia, but instead lying on the dusty, blood-soaked ground after the clash, perhaps with a spear lodged in your leg, or a sword gash across your arm, or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a soldier on a Civil War battlefield after a major engagement, surrounded by the wounded and dying, with only rudimentary medical care available, or a pioneer on the American frontier, facing a severe injury far from any trained doctor, where infection was a death sentence and pain was endured without modern relief. The initial adrenaline rush of the thrust and push from Chapter 3 has faded, replaced by a wave of searing pain and a growing sense of dread. Around you, the sounds of battle have receded, replaced by the chilling symphony of groans, whimpers, and desperate cries for help. This is the pervasive, often horrifying, reality of wounds and blood, brutal aftermath, where survival was a coin toss, and even a superficial injury could quickly spiral into a fatal ordeal, turning every breath into an agonizing reminder of your vulnerability. The types of wounds inflicted in Phalanx combat were often catastrophic. The dory, your primary spear, remember that formidable, unwieldy weapon from Chapter 2, was designed for thrusting. A spear thrust could pierce armor, though not always, and would cause deep, penetrating wounds. A thrust to the abdomen could rupture organs, leading to a slow, agonizing death from internal bleeding and peritonitis. A thrust to the chest could puncture a lung or heart, causing immediate collapse. Even a wound to a limb, if the spear severed an artery, could lead to rapid exsanguination. And imagine the sheer force of the blow, often delivered with the weight of the entire phalanx behind it, capable of shattering bone and tearing through muscle, far more devastating than a modern knife wound. Once the spears broke and combat devolved into the xiphos or kopis, your shorter swords, the nature of the wounds changed to hacking and slashing injuries. These swords, heavy and sharp, could inflict gruesome cuts, severing limbs, cleaving bone, and creating wide, gaping wounds. A blow to the head, even if deflected by a Corinthian helmet that heavy. Claustrophobic headgear from Chapter 2 could still cause severe concussion or internal bleeding. A deep slash to a limb could cripple you for life, rendering you useless for farming or craftsmanship. Unlike modern firearms, which create neat entry and exit wounds, ancient bladed weapons caused widespread tissue damage, increasing pain and the risk of infection. A common historical truth is that hoplite warfare resulted in brutal, often mortal wounds from spears and swords, with limited medical intervention, meaning that even non-fatal injuries frequently led to death from infection, blood loss, or complications. Historians still widely debate the precise mortality rates for various types of wounds on the ancient battlefield, as detailed medical records are scarce and rely heavily on interpretation of skeletal remains in literary accounts. And then there was the grim reality of infection. With no understanding of germs or sterile practices, every wound, no matter how small, was an open invitation for bacteria. Dust, dirt, and fragments of clothing or weapon material would be driven deep into the flesh. Without antibiotics, even a minor cut could become infected, leading to fever, sepsis, gangrene, and eventually, death. Imagine a simple scratch on your arm today, turning into a festering, life-threatening abscess because there's no way to clean it properly or stop the spread of infection. A fear far more immediate than worrying about a simple cut from a kitchen knife in your well-stocked home in Boston, Massachusetts. Medical care on the battlefield was rudimentary at best. There were no dedicated field hospitals or trained medics in the modern sense. While some hoplites might have had basic knowledge of herbs or rudimentary bandaging techniques, their efforts were often insufficient against severe trauma. The best they could hope for was to staunch the bleeding with cloths or rudimentary tourniquets. Pain relief was almost non-existent. You simply endured the agonizing pain, perhaps with a swig of rough wine, but mostly just with sheer willpower. Amputations, if performed, were usually done without anesthetics and with high mortality rates due to shock and infection. The concept of care was more about comforting the dying than effectively saving lives. The sheer number of wounded after a significant engagement would be overwhelming. The battlefield, once the fighting ceased, transformed into a vast, horrifying landscape of suffering. The moans of the injured would fill the air, mingling with the stench of blood and death. Remember the sensory overload from Chapter 5. You would see men grasping at their guts, bleeding profusely from severed limbs, or struggling to breathe with punctured lungs. The task of identifying the dead, moving the wounded, and dealing with the aftermath was a gruesome and emotionally draining ordeal. A haunting counterpoint to the glory of victory, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about wounds and blood-brutal aftermath is the curious phenomenon of the whispered tally, where, amidst the chaotic and gruesome aftermath of battle, some hoplites, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer scale of suffering, would instinctively, or even consciously, engage in a repetitive, silent tallying of mundane observations, counting the number of unbroken spears still on the ground, the number of discarded shields, or the distinct type of groan from the wounded, a desperate, clandestine attempt to ground themselves in a manageable mental task. Turning a grim inventory into a temporary psychological shield against the overwhelming horror and despair of the battlefield's aftermath, imagine yourself, a hoplite survivor, walking through the strewn bodies, your mind reeling from the sights and sounds as you find yourself involuntarily counting the discarded hoplon shields, or noting the distinct pattern of a comrade's final breath. Using this detached, almost obsessive observation as a desperate lifeline to prevent your mind from completely shattering in the face of such overwhelming carnage. It truly sucked to be so utterly surrounded by death and suffering that your only coping mechanism was a bizarre, repetitive mental exercise, trying to find order in the ultimate chaos just to maintain a fragile grip on reality. The distinction between victory and defeat often meant the difference between some care and none at all. The victorious side might return to the battlefield to recover their own wounded and dead, perhaps offering rudimentary care to their comrades before they succumbed. The defeated, however, would often be left to die where they fell, or captured and sold into slavery with no hope of aid. The fate of the wounded was inextricably tied to the outcome of the battle, making victory not just about glory, but about survival itself. The psychological toll on the survivors, the Brotherhood of Bronze from Chapter 6 who witnessed such carnage, was immense. The images of suffering, the cries of their dying comrades, the smell of blood, these would be seared into their memories. Guilt, survivor's guilt, would undoubtedly plague many, wondering why they survived when their friend, their brother, their neighbor did not. These emotional wounds, though invisible, were often as debilitating as the physical ones, foreshadowing the deeper trauma we'll discuss in Homecoming's Shadow in Chapter 9. Historians still widely debate the long-term public health consequences of large-scale battles in ancient Greece, particularly the spread of disease from unburied bodies and contaminated water sources, and the impact on the civilian population, the legacy of wounds and blood. Brutal aftermath is a powerful, grim reminder of the true cost of ancient warfare. It highlights the vulnerability of the human body without modern medical intervention, and the profound suffering inflicted by the weapons of the past. This historical reality underscores the immense value we now place on advanced medical care, pain management, and the ethical treatment of the wounded, principles that were utterly alien to the ancient battlefield. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling a minor ache or discomfort that you know will be easily remedied by modern medicine, remember the agonizing reality of the hoplite's wounds, and appreciate the profound comfort and safety of a world where healing is a possibility, not just a desperate hope in the face of certain death. Let's gently return from the grim, blood-soaked fields of wounds and blood brutal aftermath, where every injury was a dance with death. If Chapter 7 explored the physical consequences of combat, tonight we'll shift our focus to the intangible yet immense emotional aftermath of battle, exploring how the very essence of victory and defeat shaped the Roman psyche. We're going to explore the profound, often contradictory, reality of the weight of victory, glory, and loss, contemplating how the elation of triumph was inevitably intertwined with the deep sorrow of personal and collective loss, turning moments of supposed glory into complex tapestries of pride, grief, and the chilling realization of what it truly cost. Imagine yourself now, a hoplite survivor in ancient Greece, not celebrating a hard-fought championship game with joyous teammates and cheering crowds in a bustling stadium in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but instead standing on a battlefield after the roar has subsided, the enemy has routed, and the chilling quiet of victory descends, or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a soldier after the Battle of Gettysburg, witnessing the immense casualties even in victory, or a community celebrating the end of World War II, but with the painful awareness of the immense human cost, the adrenaline, that potent mix that coursed through your veins during fear and courage from Chapter 4, slowly recedes, leaving you utterly drained. Both physically and emotionally, you are alive, you have won. But as you look around at the field littered with the bodies of your comrades, the initial surge of triumph is immediately tempered by a profound, suffocating sorrow. This is the pervasive, often bittersweet, reality of the weight of victory, glory, and loss, where the celebration of martial success was inextricably linked to the solemn recognition of immense sacrifice, turning every cheer into an echo of unspoken grief, and every moment of pride into a poignant reminder of what and who was left behind. For the victorious hoplite, the immediate sensation was often one of immense relief. You had survived. You had pushed through the terrifying thrust and push from Chapter 3, endured the sensory overload from Chapter 5, and emerged from the maelstrom. There would be shouts of triumph, embraces with your remaining comrades, a shared release of tension that had been building for hours, or even days. This immediate visceral joy of survival was powerful, almost intoxicating. You had faced death, and you had, for now, conquered it. However, this elation was swiftly followed by the grim task of collecting the dead. This was a sacred duty, often negotiated through a truce with the defeated enemy. You and your surviving Brotherhood of Bronze from Chapter 6 would carefully move through the battlefield, identifying your fallen comrades. This was where the true weight of loss would sink in. You would recognize faces you knew from childhood, from the training grounds, from countless shared meals. You would see the young man who stood to your left, whose shield protected your exposed side, now lying lifeless, perhaps with a spear wound that mirrors the very dangers you faced. The sheer number of dead, the mangled bodies, and the reality of their sacrifices would be a sobering counterpoint to any sense of glory. Imagine walking through a school gymnasium, expecting a celebration. But instead, every space is filled with the silent, broken bodies of everyone you've ever known, and you are tasked with identifying each one. This grim ritual, far more profound than any post-game celebration in a modern sports arena, made the cost of victory painfully clear. A common historical truth is that even victorious Greek city-states experienced significant casualties in phalanx battles, and the immediate aftermath involved the grim, solemn duty of collecting and mourning their fallen comrades, tempering any triumph with profound collective grief. Historians still widely debate the long-term demographic impact of recurrent warfare on specific Greek city-states, and how the loss of male citizens affected their social and economic structures over generations. The ritual of burial was a crucial part of processing this loss. The bodies of the fallen hoplites would be cremated or buried in mass graves, often marked by simple yet powerful monuments. A collective funeral ceremony would be held, where the names of the dead would be read aloud, and a eulogy delivered, typically by a prominent citizen. This public act of mourning allowed the community to acknowledge their sacrifice and to share in the collective grief. For the survivors, participating in these rituals was a way to honor their comrades, to internalize the cost, and to reaffirm their civic duty. It was a somber, sacred event, far removed from a casual memorial service in a modern funeral home in Sacramento, California. It was a deeply ingrained communal act of remembrance and shared sorrow. Glory, in the ancient Greek context, was a complex concept. It wasn't just about winning, it was about the way you won, about demonstrating courage, discipline, and commitment to your city-state. For the surviving hoplites, especially those in the front ranks who had faced the brunt of the fighting, there would be a profound sense of pride. You had done your duty. You had stood firm. You had contributed to the defense and honor of your polis. This personal glory, this validation of your courage of victory over your own. Fear from Chapter 4 was a powerful psychological reward, a counterweight to the trauma of battle. You were hailed as a hero, a defender of your homeland, a testament to the ideals of citizenship. However, this glory was often intertwined with loss. How could you truly celebrate when your shield mate, your brother in arms, was no longer there to share the triumph? The cheers of the crowd might ring hollow when you remembered the screams of the dying. The pride in your victory would be tinged with the ache of absence. This complex emotional landscape, the simultaneous experience of joy and sorrow, triumph and grief, was a hallmark of the hoplite experience. It was not a simple, clean victory. It was a messy, painful triumph purchased at an immense human cost. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the weight of victory, glory, and loss is the curious phenomenon of the silent libation, where, after a hard-won victory and the public rituals of mourning for the fallen, some hoplite veterans, in the quiet solitude of their homes or a secluded corner of a temple, would pour out a small, unobserved libation of wine or water onto the ground, not for a specific god or a formal ceremony, but as a private, unspoken offering to the unknown spirits of the battlefield, a personal act of appeasement or remembrance for the nameless dead of both sides, turning a common ritual into a deeply personal, clandestine acknowledgement of the widespread, unseen suffering that underlay their glory. Imagine yourself, a victorious hoplite, months after the battle, raising your cup of wine in a quiet moment, then discreetly pouring a small amount onto the earth, a silent acknowledgement of the anonymous dead, perhaps a forgotten enemy, perhaps a comrade whose body was never found, a private act of solemn remembrance that transcended the public celebration of your victory, a deeply personal and poignant gesture. It truly sucked to carry such a heavy burden of shared suffering that your private moments of remembrance extended even to unknown foes. A silent testament to the overwhelming cost of war that permeated every aspect of your being. The economic cost of victory was also significant. Even a winning city-state would have incurred massive expenses in equipping and provisioning its hoplites. Remember the heavy burden from Chapter 2, and the loss of able-bodied men, even in victory, meant a reduction in the workforce for farming, trade, and craftsmanship. These were not professional soldiers who could be easily replaced. They were the backbone of the civilian economy. So, while there was glory, there was also a tangible economic impact that would linger long after the initial celebrations faded. A grim balance sheet of human lives and civic resources. Historians still widely debate the extent to which Greek dramatists, in their tragedies, accurately reflected the complex emotional landscape of victory and loss experienced by hoplite veterans, or if their portrayals were primarily shaped by philosophical and political aims. The trophy was a visual symbol of victory, often erected on the battlefield itself. This was not a grand monument, but a simple structure made from the armor and weapons of the defeated enemy. Typically a tree trunk hung with their shields, helmets, and cuirasses, it served as a stark, tangible reminder of the victory, a point of pride for the victors, and a grim warning for the defeated. For the hoplite, seeing the enemy's broken gear on display would offer a powerful sense of accomplishment, a tangible proof of the brutal triumph they had achieved. Yet, even this symbol was impermanent, designed to decay and return to nature, a subtle reminder that all glory is fleeting, and the scars of battle, both visible and invisible, would remain. The long journey home. The process of reintegrating into civilian life, a challenge we'll fully explore in Homecoming's Shadow. In Chapter 9, would be another test. The cheers of the crowd would eventually fade, replaced by the mundane realities of daily life. But the memories of wounds and blood from Chapter 7 and the faces of the fallen would forever remain etched in your mind. The legacy of the weight of victory, glory, and loss is a profound meditation on the complex, often paradoxical, nature of human achievement. It highlights that even in triumph, there is often immense sorrow, and that true glory is often forged not just in victory, but in the willingness to face profound loss. This historical reality underscores the enduring human experience of war, where the celebrations of success are always tempered by the grim understanding of sacrifice. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet pride of a personal accomplishment, remember the hoplite's bittersweet triumph, where glory was earned amidst profound grief, and appreciate the freedom you have to celebrate your victories without the haunting presence of so much immediate, tangible loss. Let's gently return from the bittersweet triumph of the weight of victory, glory, and loss, where the cheers of the crowd were always mingled with the ghosts of the fallen. If Chapter 8 explored the immediate aftermath of battle, tonight we'll delve into the enduring, often hidden, struggle that followed the hoplite long after the dust had settled and the city had celebrated. We're going to explore the stark, unacknowledged reality of Homecoming's shadow trauma's lingering grip, contemplating how the profound psychological and physical scars of Phalanx combat, from the visceral horrors of wounds and blood from Chapter 7 to the constant internal battle of fear and courage from Chapter 4, transformed returning soldiers, forcing them to navigate a world that often failed to understand the invisible burdens they carried. Turning their quiet civilian lives into a continuous, internal battlefield, imagine yourself now, a hoplite veteran, not stepping off a modern transport plane to a cheering crowd and a comfortable, ready-made life in a quiet suburb of Colorado Springs. Colorado, but instead, limping or simply walking with a vacant stare back into your familiar village, your city-state, after months or even years away fighting. Or to give it an American context, picture yourself as a Civil War veteran returning home to a rural community, grappling with the horrors you witnessed and the loss of your comrades, but with no concept of PTSD or mental health support, or a Vietnam veteran facing a society that struggled to understand or acknowledge the profound psychological impact of your combat experiences. The initial joyous greetings from your family and neighbors quickly fade as the routine of daily life reasserts itself. But you are not the same man who left. The echoes of the scent of battle from Chapter 5. The faces of the dying. The constant pressure of the thrust and push from Chapter 3. These linger, replaying in your mind, transforming your familiar world into a landscape of haunting memories. This is the pervasive, often isolating, reality of Homecoming's shadow trauma's lingering grip, where the silent battles waged within the mind of the veteran were often as debilitating as any wound from the battlefield. Turning the familiar comforts of home into a disquieting reminder of a life irrevocably altered by the horrors of war. One of the most immediate and visible signs of lingering trauma would be physical injuries and chronic pain. While some wounds might have healed, many hoplites would return with permanent disabilities: a limp from a poorly healed leg wound, a stiff arm from a sword cut, chronic pain from old fractures, or lasting scars that served as constant, grim reminders of their ordeal. These physical limitations would impact their ability to return to their former livelihoods, whether farming, craftsmanship, or trade. Imagine trying to plow a field with a damaged leg, or sculpt with a hand that trembles from nerve damage. A daily frustration far more isolating than dealing with a modern, chronic condition in a well-equipped rehabilitation center. This physical burden would be a constant, visible manifestation of their sacrifice, affecting every aspect of their civilian lives. Then there were the invisible wounds, psychological trauma. While the Greeks didn't have a concept equivalent to modern post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), the symptoms would have been undeniable. Nightmares, vivid flashbacks of combat, the sounds, smells, and sights of sensory overload from Chapter 5. Hypervigilance, irritability, emotional numbness, and difficulty forming close relationships would have plagued many veterans. The constant adrenaline of battle would leave them prone to sudden outbursts of anger or fits of profound despair. They might struggle to reintegrate into the peaceful routines of civilian life, finding ordinary sounds jarring or large crowds overwhelming. Imagine trying to explain the unexplainable horrors you witnessed to a civilian population that had no framework for understanding such profound psychological distress. A loneliness far deeper than any social isolation felt in a bustling modern city like Los Angeles. California. A common historical truth is that Greek hoplite veterans often suffered from lasting physical injuries and unaddressed psychological trauma upon returning from combat, including symptoms consistent with what is now known as PTSD, which impacted their reintegration into civilian life and overall well-being. Historians still widely debate the specific cultural coping mechanisms and societal support, or lack thereof, available to ancient Greek veterans suffering from combat trauma. As direct documentation is limited and largely inferred from broader social practices, the profound sense of loss and survivor's guilt would also linger. You had survived, but your Brotherhood of Bronze from Chapter 6 might have been decimated. The faces of those who fell, the shared terror you endured, the knowledge that you lived while they did not. This would weigh heavily on your conscience. You might question why you were spared, or feel a deep, unshakable sorrow for the comrades you left behind on the battlefield. This burden of memory, This persistent ghost of the fallen would follow you, coloring every moment of your civilian life, making the joy of survival a bittersweet, often guilt-ridden experience. It's like carrying a heavy, invisible backpack filled with the memories of every friend you lost, constantly reminding you of the cost of your survival. The contrast between the intensity of battle and the mundane reality of civilian life could be jarring. After the primal urgency of combat, the need for hyper-awareness and instant decision-making, the routines of farming or craftsmanship might feel meaningless, dull, or even stifling. The veteran might struggle to find purpose in a world that no longer demanded the extreme discipline and courage he had relied on. This sense of disorientation, of feeling alien in your own home, could lead to further isolation and emotional distress. Imagine a retired professional athlete, once at the peak of physical and mental intensity, now trying to adjust to a quiet life, struggling to find meaning in the everyday, but with the added layer of having faced literal life or death situations. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about Homecoming's shadow trauma's lingering grip is the curious phenomenon of the whispered ritual of the worn bronze, where some hoplite veterans, struggling with the invisible burdens of war, would secretly polish and repeatedly run their fingers over a small, personal piece of their old bronze armor. Perhaps a fragment of their Corinthian helmet or a small section of their hoplon, carrying it as a clandestine tactile anchor, a silent, almost obsessive ritual that grounded them in the tangible past and allowed them a momentary, private reconnection with the identity they had forged in battle, serving as a comfort and a quiet act of processing their trauma that no one else would understand. Imagine yourself, a veteran farmer, sitting alone in the quiet of your home after a long day, pulling out a small, smooth piece of bronze from your tunic and running your thumb over its worn surface, the cool metal a stark contrast to the rough texture of your calloused fingers. A silent, internal acknowledgement of the man you once were on the battlefield, finding a strange, fleeting comfort in this private ritual, away from the expectations of civilian life. It truly sucked to be so haunted by your past that your only solace was a secret, repetitive interaction with a piece of old armor, a silent attempt to find peace in the very object that represented your most traumatic experiences. Societal understanding of these invisible wounds was largely non-existent. There were no therapists, no support groups, no formal mechanisms for processing combat trauma. Veterans were simply expected to get over it, to return to their roles as citizens and family members. Any outward signs of distress might be seen as weakness, a failure of civic virtue, or even divine displeasure. This lack of understanding would further isolate the veteran, forcing them to internalize their suffering and leading to a profound sense of loneliness. While the concept of public face, private pain from Chapter 8 applied to all citizens, for the veteran, this emotional suppression was magnified 1,000-fold. Historians still widely debate the long-term impact of unaddressed combat trauma on the social fabric of Greek city-states, particularly how it might have influenced family dynamics, political stability, and the prevalence of social unrest or civic disengagement among veteran populations. Coping mechanisms would have varied. Some might turn to alcohol or other forms of escapism. Others might find solace in religious rituals or philosophical contemplation. Some might simply withdraw from society, living a quiet, isolated life. For many, the only real understanding would come from fellow veterans, from their brotherhood of bronze, who shared the same unspoken memories and recognized the same haunted look in each other's eyes. These informal connections, often forged in shared trauma, would become vital lifelines, quiet islands of understanding in a sea of civilian incomprehension. The very acts of resilience we discussed in Echoes in the Villa from Chapter 9, but here we see a grim application would be essential for veterans. Their ability to adapt, to cultivate an inner life, to find purpose in new ways, would be crucial for their survival beyond the battlefield. But even for the most resilient, the shadow of combat would never fully lift. It would remain a permanent, if often hidden, part of their identity, The legacy of Homecoming's shadow trauma's lingering grip is a stark and deeply human reminder that the cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield, reaching into the very heart of the homes and lives of those who survive. It highlights the invisible burdens carried by veterans throughout history, long before modern psychology gave a name to their suffering. This historical reality underscores the immense importance of mental health awareness, compassionate support for veterans, and the profound societal responsibility to acknowledge and heal the unseen wounds of war. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet safety of your own home, remember the hoplite veteran, struggling silently with the ghosts of battles long past, and appreciate the profound privilege of living in a world that, however imperfectly, strives to understand, acknowledge, and heal the lingering shadows of trauma, offering solace that was unimaginable for those ancient heroes. Chuangshas, let's gently return from the haunting, often unspoken, reality of Homecoming's shadow trauma's lingering grip, where the hoplite veteran carried the invisible scars of battle into his civilian life. If Chapter 9 explored the individual psychological toll, tonight we'll zoom out from the ancient Greek battlefield and into our own modern world, drawing profound connections between those ancient struggles and the fundamental structures and values we hold dear today. We're going to explore echoes in our time, legacy of collective action, contemplating how the lessons learned from the terrifying discipline, unwavering camaraderie, and immense personal sacrifice of the Greek phalanx continue to subtly, yet powerfully, shape our understanding of teamwork, civic duty, and the true cost of conflict in various aspects of contemporary society, from sports teams to military units and even our democratic institutions. Imagine yourself now, a modern citizen, not bracing for a spear thrust in a dense formation, but perhaps watching a highly synchronized athletic performance. Like a crew team rowing in perfect unison on a placid lake in Gainesville, Florida, or observing a rapid response unit of firefighters moving as one through a chaotic scene in New York City. Or, to give it an American context, picture yourself as a new recruit in a basic training camp in Fort Benning, Georgia, learning to move as part of a unit or a member of a tightly knit surgical team in a bustling hospital where every individual action contributes to a collective life-saving effort. The ancient Greek phalanx might seem like a relic of a distant past, but its core principles, rigid discipline, absolute reliance on your comrades, and the sublimation of individual will for collective success, resonate profoundly in countless facets of our contemporary lives. This is the pervasive, often unacknowledged, reality of echoes in our time legacy of collective action, where the enduring lessons of ancient warfare, particularly the powerful dynamic of the phalanx, continue to influence and inform our modern concepts of effective teamwork, shared responsibility, and the ultimate sacrifices made for a greater collective purpose. Turning historical insights into living principles. First, consider the principle of discipline and synchronization. Remember the unyielding wall from Chapter 1, where every hoplite had to move, breathe, and fight as one, a single massive entity. This fundamental requirement for perfect cohesion is replicated in many modern high-stakes environments. Think of a military parade, where soldiers march in perfect step, their movements so synchronized they appear to be one being. While purely ceremonial, this demonstrates the core training designed to instill instantaneous, unquestioning obedience and collective movement. In active military units, whether it's a squad clearing a building or a naval crew operating a complex warship, the ability to act as a seamless unit, where individual actions are perfectly coordinated, is paramount. Just as a single hoplite breaking rank could doom the phalanx, a single misstep in a modern military operation can have catastrophic consequences. The Greek phalanx, in its terrifying efficiency, was an early, profound masterclass in controlled, synchronized aggression. Then, there's the enduring power of camaraderie and trust. Recall the Brotherhood of Bronze from Chapter 6. where your very survival depended on the steadfastness of the man next to you whose shield covered your flank. This concept of absolute mutual reliance is a cornerstone of modern team dynamics, particularly in professions where lives are at stake. Firefighters rushing into a burning building, police officers responding to a dangerous call, surgical teams performing complex operations. In these contexts, trust in your colleagues is not just a nice-to-have, it's a life-saving necessity. The ancient hoplite's unwavering faith in his shieldmate finds a direct echo in the modern professional's reliance on their teammates, where shared vulnerability forges unbreakable bonds, far deeper than any casual acquaintance. It's like a tightly knit family, but where every member's role is critical to the survival of the others. A bond more profound than any sports team's locker room connection in a city like Boston. Massachusetts. A common historical truth is that the organizational principles of the Greek Phalanx, particularly its emphasis on collective discipline, mutual reliance, and cohesion over individual prowess, have profoundly influenced military tactics and team dynamics throughout history, including many aspects of modern professional and tactical units. Historians still widely debate the precise evolutionary links between ancient military structures and contemporary organizational theories, and whether the unique socio-political context of the Greek city-states makes direct comparisons fully applicable to modern, diversified societies. The concept of shared sacrifice for a greater good is another powerful legacy. The hoplite risked everything, his life, his well-being, his future, for the defense of his city-state and the preservation of its way of life. This idea that individual citizens are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the collective resonates deeply in modern democratic societies. When we send our soldiers into harm's way, when we ask citizens to serve in public office, or when communities come together to face a common crisis, we are drawing upon this ancient wellspring of civic duty and collective responsibility. The hoplite's readiness to die with his shield, rather than abandon his comrades, finds a modern echo in the valor of first responders rushing into danger, or soldiers putting their lives on the line for their nation. Even if the weapons and the scale of conflict have changed dramatically, consider how we train in competitive sports. A football offensive line, a basketball team executing a pick and roll, a synchronized swimming team. All these rely on the same fundamental principles of cohesive action, where individual talent is amplified by perfect coordination. The coaches of these teams emphasize discipline, repetition, and the importance of every player performing their specific role, much like the relentless drills that forged the hoplite into a part of the unyielding wall. Even the heavy gear of the hoplite, that heavy burden from Chapter 2, finds a parallel in the specialized equipment and physical conditioning required for modern athletes, demonstrating that physical preparation remains key to collective performance. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about echoes in our time. Legacy of collective action is the curious phenomenon of the ritual of the pre-game huddle, where, unknowingly, many modern sports teams recreate a highly simplified, yet psychologically resonant, version of the ancient Phalanx's pre-battle gathering, forming a tight circle, often with arms around each other, to exchange final instructions, boost morale, and reinforce their collective identity. A subtle echo of the hoplite's silent, communal bracing for impact, transforming a tactical necessity into a vital, clandestine moment of psychological unification before a shared challenge. Imagine yourself, a football player, standing shoulder to shoulder with your teammates in a tight huddle before a crucial play, feeling the warmth of their bodies, hearing their whispered calls, and sensing the collective determination, unaware that you are, in a very modern way, engaging in an act that echoes the ancient Roman practice of publicly honoring your family and ancestors, but now with the added layers of personal choice and a global audience. A truly fascinating blend of ancient human needs and modern technological expression. It truly sucked that even with all our modern freedom, we still find ourselves performing for an audience, albeit a digital one, feeling the subtle pressure to curate our lives for public consumption. A distant echo of the Roman need for dignitas, the reality of wounds and blood, from Chapter 7 and Homecoming's shadow from Chapter 9, also finds echoes in our modern approach to conflict. While we have advanced medical care and a growing understanding of psychological trauma, the enduring human cost of war remains profound. The discussions around veteran care, mental health support for those returning from combat, and the societal responsibility to those who have sacrificed are direct descendants of the unaddressed suffering endured by ancient hoplites. The grim accounting of lives lost and lives irrevocably altered by battle is a universal constant. A sobering reminder that even with advanced technology, the human element of suffering and resilience remains at the core of conflict. The pursuit of glory, that weight of victory from Chapter 8, is always tempered by the immense personal and societal cost, a lesson humanity continues to grapple with. Historians still widely debate the degree to which the democratic structures of Greek city-states fostered a unique form of civic participation and military loyalty among hoplites, and how this particular model of citizen soldiering has influenced the development of democratic ideals and military recruitment in subsequent historical periods. Even in our political systems, the legacy of collective action can be seen. The idea of a citizenry uniting for a common purpose, of individuals contributing their voices and efforts to a collective decision, has roots in the ancient Greek city-states, where hoplites were not just soldiers but active participants in their democracies. While far from perfect, the concept of civic engagement, of standing together not literally with shields, but metaphorically with shared values and goals for the good of the community, is an enduring principle that draws strength from these ancient examples. The powerful image of a united front, whether on a battlefield or in a legislative assembly, continues to shape our ideals of effective governance and societal progress. The Phalanx, in its terrifying simplicity, teaches us that collective strength can overcome individual limitations. It shows us the power of discipline, the necessity of trust, and the profound impact of shared purpose. But it also reminds us of the immense personal cost, the way individual identity can be subsumed by the collective, and the enduring physical and psychological burdens carried by those who serve. The silent battles waged within the hoplite's mind that fear and courage from Chapter 4 are mirrored in the modern struggles for mental resilience and well-being. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, in the quiet comfort of your own home, perhaps feeling the soft hum of your everyday life, take a moment to reflect on the echoes in our time. Consider the sports teams you admire, the military personnel who serve, the civic groups working for change, or simply the moments when you've trusted a colleague or relied on a friend. In all these instances, you are witnessing and participating in the subtle, enduring legacy of the Greek Phalanx. Its lessons about discipline, solidarity, and the profound cost of collective action are woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Often unseen, but always present. Rest easy, knowing that while the ancient world was defined by harsh realities, it also laid the groundwork for many of the freedoms and comforts we now enjoy. A complex tapestry of human struggle and enduring progress. Sleep well, with the quiet understanding that the courage of the ancient hoplite and the unbreakable bonds forged in bronze still echo softly in the quiet determination of our own collective pursuits.